ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your favorite Sunday night thing, Hardy on History. Yes, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope everybody is doing well. It's a very cold evening here in the mountains of western North Carolina. 20 degrees outside, snowed all day. They say we could get another half a foot, which, hey, it's February, so that's to be expected. Hope everybody is doing really, really well. Drop me a note. Let me know where you're watching from or listening from this evening. Means absolutely nothing, but I enjoy seeing it. Not been a really exciting week this past week. I did spend yesterday local library. They have an mini authors festival. So I got to talk to some folks down in Burke County, North Carolina, in the Morganton area. It was pretty cool. Oh, that's right. Didn't we do that this past Monday? Yeah. So we did our first school group of the year this past Monday. We were at Tapestry of Grace in Boone and talked to about 50. It's a homeschool co-op. Talked to about 50 or so kids and probably a dozen parents and teachers. And it went really, really, really good. We probably could have taken the entire day, but we had about an hour and laid out the whole table and talked to the kids, and they had a bunch of great questions. And it went really, really well. Not a whole lot of exciting things going on this week, but this upcoming Saturday, the time-traveling Hardys will be at the big event down at Museum of the Waxhaws. That is Saturday, February 28th. And we'll be hanging out in the 1940s. So I encourage you, excuse me, if you're out in the greater southern Piedmont of North Carolina or upstate South Carolina, come on out and join us. And there'll be a lot of cool World War I, World War II interpreters there, a lot of cool programs. Museum of the Waxhaws, Saturday, February 28th, 2026. If you show up, say, hey, I see you on Hardy on History. That would be cool. So that's the only thing I have going on this week as far as an update on the Lee project. I have a manuscript. I have it's going off to a couple of readers in the next couple of weeks. I've been talking to the map guy. I've got a boatload of images still to collect, both things that I've taken over the past 30 years and stuff from Library of Congress and National Archives and a couple of other places that I'm going to get images from. Or it's going to take a week or two to get all of that together, but I'm going to be working on that while my readers are working on the manuscript. So that's what's going on with that. I want to say good evening to Adam and Robert and Niels and Jason and Al and Ryan and Johnny. Thanks, everybody, for joining me on this cold February evening. 20 degrees and windy outside. So working on the Lee new books to the library. I've got Robert E. Krickenberger Jr.'s new book on Point Lookout that came this week. If you're interested in such things, of course, I've not read it yet, but go to savasbeatty.com and order a copy of this book. There's our friend James this evening. There's our friend Garrett this evening. Hope everybody is doing David Pope. Hope everybody's doing really good. But looks like a good book. I did flip through it here for a few minutes, but we're just going to have to go on the shelf for the short time being. So working on this Lee project, I've been going through Charlie Knight's From Arlington to Appomattox, which is a day-by-day book of Robert E. Lee. And one of the things I noticed, of course, I've read that before. I was one of Charlie's readers. I've read that before. And I thought, there's a lot of mentions of John S. Mosby. A lot of mentions. And I wonder what their interaction was like during the war. So this is by no means in depth what I'm going to share this evening. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to explore this a little bit more. I've got the Mosby books that I have out, Jeffrey D. Wirt's book out, Virgil Jones's book out. I have a book on the 43rd Battalion over there. I've got this book that I never even actually opened today. It's actually has nothing to do with John S. Mosby. Never mind. It's called Great Ghost of the Confederacy. I didn't pick it up and notice it was stuck right there with my Mosby books. Um, hmm? No, there's some more Mosby stuff in here, but I didn't have time to find it. But let's talk a little bit about this relationship between Mosby and Robert E. Lee. And all of this will be up with some more will be up on Looking for the Confederate War tomorrow, my blog. I encourage you to go check it out. Lee, of course, was a lot older than Mosby. Mosby was born in 1833. Robert E. Lee was born in 1807, both from Virginia. Um, Mosby's childhood is in young teenager years, older young adult years are interesting. They moved around a couple of places. Of course, Lee moved around. He was born in Stafford Hall, and he grew up in the greater Arlington area in Arlington. But Mosby, from what I was reading, had this confrontation when he was a student at the University of Virginia. And he was a little guy and was often bullied. And he stood up to one of those bullies one time. And as the bully charged him, Mosby actually shot him. And Mosby was arrested and convicted of the crime. He was expelled from the University of Virginia. And as he is found guilty and as he is doing time, he actually befriends the prosecuting attorney while he is incarcerated and starts to read law. So I think we're all familiar with stories of people who are in jail studying law and representing themselves. I don't know if Mosby ever represented himself or not. Mosby was later pardoned by the governor of Virginia and went before the Supreme Court and was admitted to practice law. And then he moved to Bristol and Virginia area. I probably knew that, but as I was working on this, I've been to Bristol many times. How could I not know that? But that was not new, but it was kind of new to me today. And so he moves to Bristol. He gets married, and he's there practicing law at the start of the war. Of course, Robert E. Lee, graduate from West Point. He served as an engineer in the United States Army. He was breveted 3 times for his role in the Mexican-American War. And in the early days of the secession crisis, Lee is serving with a cavalry regiment in Texas. The war starts. Mosby joins the Army. He's a private in the Washington Mounted Rifles under Grumble Jones. And they will eventually become a member of the 1st Virginia Cavalry Regiment. Not seriously engaged at the Battle of First Manassas, but they are there in the whole Fairfax, Urbana area doing scouting duty and everything for months following the battle there in July of 1861. In early 1862, Mosby was promoted to adjutant of the regiment with the rank of 1st lieutenant. March of 1862, he goes on his very first independent scout. Jeb Stuart sends him off to observe McClellan's forces. This is right after Joe Johnston has pulled the army out of the defenses around Washington, D.C., Manassas area. And Mosby is sent to go and scout the Federals and see if they are mounting a serious pursuit or if it's not all of that serious of an event. And he makes it back, and he says that Mosby reports back to Stuart and says that there was no serious pursuit of the Confederate Army at that time. 1863, 1864, 1865, 1866, 1867, 1868, 1869, 1870, 1871, 1872, 1873, 1874, 1875, 1876, 1877, 1878, 1879, 1880, 1881, 1882, 1883, 1884, 1885, 1886, 1887, 1888, 1889, 1890, 1900, 1901, 1902, 1903, 1904, 1905, 1906, 1907, 1908, 1909, 1910, 1911, 1912, 1913, 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918, 1919, 1920, 1921, 1922, 1923, 1924, 1925, 1926, 1927, 1928, 1929, 1930, 1931, 1932, 1933, 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938, 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942, 1943, 1944, 1945, 1946, 1947, 1948, 1949, 1950, 1951, 1952, 1953, 1954, 1955, 1956, 1957, 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961, 19 In the spring of 1862, a lot of the Confederate regiments are being reorganized, and they are trying to get men to enlist for 3 years of the war, all these 6 month or 1 year volunteers. And Mosby's regiments is one of those regiments. Um, when they are reorganized, Fitzhugh Lee becomes the commander of the regiment. And I know I'm compressing a lot of history here. Mosby takes it as an opportunity to resign because he doesn't like Fitzhugh Lee. And he doesn't really have a job at that time. But Stuart keeps Mosby as a scout. It's Mosby who scouted the Federal position first that would lead to Stuart's famed ride around McClellan in June of 1862. Robert E. Lee actually makes mention of Mosby in his report about the raid. I don't think they've met yet at that point in time, but that's when I guess that Lee first becomes aware of Mosby and who he is. After this campaign, okay, Mosby is there with Stuart during the 7 Days campaign itself, or backing up. Mosby is a part of the ride around McClellan. He's there with the 7 Days campaign, doing scouting and everything. But after the 7 Days campaign, Mosby comes up with this idea of a partisan Ranger command that could harass Federal supply columns there in really any place north of the Confederate lines, but in northern Virginia. And this idea has a little merit, and Stuart sends Mosby to Stonewall Jackson, who's at Gordonsville, with this idea. On the way there, Mosby decides he wants to go see his family and rides off for a couple of days. And in that process, he is captured. Does a little time, Old Capitol Prison, but he is released within about a month, paroled and released. And then he makes his way to Lee's headquarters and has to, because of course Lee doesn't know who he is, and none of the guards at least know who he is. And finally, a staff officer hears this commotion outside and comes out and listens to Mosby. And Mosby decides, or the staff officer decides, this might have some merit. Mosby gets entrance into Lee's headquarters, and Lee's a little hesitant about believing him. And that's a whole nother idea, is Lee's relationship with scouts, but we'll tackle that at a different day. August 5th, 1862, it's the first meeting between Lee and Mosby. And when Mosby says that he was the person responsible for scouting the Federal position right before Stuart goes on his ride around McClellan, Lee gives Mosby and his information some credence. For the next several months, Mosby is on Stuart's staff serving as a scout. And it's the end of December of 1862. Stuart is scouting in Upper Virginia, and Mosby goes to him with the proposition, "Hey, can I have a couple of guys?" And Stuart says, "Sure." And over the course of the next couple of months, or month or so, mostly the month of January, Mosby and these 9 men that Stuart has allowed him to take capture some of the picket posts. When they report back to Stuart on January 22nd, 1862, they had captured 20 horses and men. Mosby asked for a few more men, and Stuart grants his request. And that is the beginning of Mosby's Rangers, which will eventually become the 43rd Battalion, Virginia Cavalry. Lee and Mosby will communicate often over the next couple of years. Mosby will send information to Lee, and Lee will send that information on to folks like Samuel Cooper there in Richmond, Virginia. And an example of that is Lee giving Cooper the information that Mosby has captured Brigadier General Edwin Stoughton in March of 1863. Lee also recommends that same month that Mosby needs to be promoted, and a couple of days later, a commission for the rank of captain, because up until this time, in between when he resigned from the 1st Virginia Cavalry up until now, he's not even been an official Confederate soldier per se. He's just a scout. But he is commissioned captain, and he has orders to recruit his command. Mosby a lot of times is operating really close to the Washington, D.C. defenses. And so that information is going back to Lee, and Lee is forwarding that information to Richmond with the information that has been gathered. Mosby continued to raid Federal wagon trains north of the Rappahannock as Lee begins his march with the Army north. It's the start of the Gettysburg campaign. And according to Mosby, it's his idea that Stuart once again ride around the Federal Army, because Mosby had scouted the area and thought that Stuart's command could get through. And so when people blame, and Robert E. Lee did this, but when people blame Stuart for being late at Gettysburg, part of that is Mosby's fault. In August of 1863, Lee writes Stuart about Mosby. He says, quote, "I fear he exercises but little control over his men. His attention has been more directed toward the capture of wagons than military damage to the enemy," which is true. And Mosby will continue to do this. But you capture a wagon, you get food for your horse. You can get horses, wagon trains, not just a wagon. You can get arms, you can get ammunition, you can get money. And a lot of Mosby's men will come and go. He will set a date, and they will muster, and they will go raid. They will come back to the area, and they will disband and go back to their homes. So a lot of the food and stuff they can take back to their families. Lee wanted Mosby to attack railroads, trying to force Meade to pull troops away from the regular army to guard those vital supply lines. And Mosby does attack railroads, but he's really after the wagon trains. He's after the settlers' wagons. He will continue to do that for the rest of the war. Lee mentions that Mosby in December of 1863 had destroyed a wagon train at Brandy Station, capturing 112 mules. Lee writes Cooper in April of 1864 that he's attempting to have Colonel Mosby's battalion mustered into regular service. If this cannot be done, Lee writes, I recommend that this battalion be retained as partisans for the present. So when Mosby first organizes his command, it is under the Partisan Ranger Act that the Confederate Congress had passed. That Partisan Ranger Act, after a little bit of time, kind of gets repealed. The idea of these men out roaming, not necessarily under anybody's command, falls out of favor. And most of the partisan ranger battalions that are organized are incorporated into the regular army. When Jubal Early commences his campaign through the Shenandoah Valley in June, July, and August of 64, Mosby joins in attacking federal positions at Point of Rocks, Mount Zion Church, the Snickers Gap War, the Berryville Wagon Train Raid, Gold's Farm, many, many others. Interesting, in the books I was reading to prepare this, talks about how Mosby twice met with Early and offered to do pretty much anything that Early ordered him to do, and Early never ordered Mosby to do anything. There is a serious falling out between the two in the post-war years. We're not really going to go into post-war talk this evening. May do that at a later time, but we won't cover that right now. Mosby paid Robert E. Lee a visit at the latter's headquarters near Petersburg on December 6, 1864. That headquarters was at a house known as Edge Hill. They had a meal together. It was a leg of mutton. which Lee joked about it being stolen since it was rare to have such a treat at headquarters by this point in time. Mosby visited Lee's headquarters again on February 2nd of 1865. That kind of appears to be the last time the two met during the war. Lee, of course, surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1863. In Loudoun County, Mosby receives word of the surrender on April 15th, asking for a ceasefire so he could verify the news. They want Mosby, the Federals want Mosby to come in and surrender. And there's a lot of stuff going on with Mosby that if he doesn't surrender, he and his men can be hunted down. There's a bounty placed on Mosby's head. There are orders for his arrest. So Mosby's like, I don't know. Y'all could be trying to trick me. So word was sent. And there's actually one member of Mosby's command that winds up in Richmond. And Robert E. Lee has just returned from the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And word gets to Lee, and he is asked, what should they do? And Lee says, well, I'm on parole, so I can't really give you any advice for the battalion. And the man asks, well, individually, what should I do? And Lee tells him to go home and start rebuilding his farm and his family. Mosby didn't do that to a degree. He finally he meets with a couple of federal generals a couple of times. There's almost some hostility there. Pistols are drawn at that last meeting. But Mosby rides on. He forms the 43rd Battalion for the last time during the World War on April 21st, 1865 in Salem, and disbands it. Mosby and a few others then ride south, hoping to link up with the Army of Tennessee and Joseph E. Johnston in North Carolina, but word arrives that Johnston has surrendered, and Mosby heads back north, sends in word and said, hey, am I going to be arrested? Is there still a bounty on my head? I'm paraphrasing. I'd like to surrender. And they finally assure him that the arrest order has been rescinded, and Mosby finally surrenders on June 17th, 1865. Lee and Mosby met a couple of times, several times during the war, at least 3 times in person during the war that can be confirmed, had dinner together once. Would that not be an incredible honor? But has dinner with Lee. And I think there's a lot to this relationship that could really be expounded upon some. But that's what I've discovered as I was working on the Lee project. And I thought it was something that we could share this evening, something that's really just piqued my interest. There's some great Mosby stuff out there. There's some great Facebook pages on Mosby. I know there's a couple other books on Mosby, at least one more in this room. I think there was a newsletter they did for years, and there's 3 or 4 copies of that here in this room. But I don't actually know where they are. I know it's rare that I don't know where a book is, but I don't actually, they're thin, but I don't know. I didn't take time to find them this evening. David, from what I saw, Mosby and early on at least didn't really get along, and maybe that's even later. That after Mosby joins the Republican Party, I don't know. That needs to be explored some more. Y'all been having a great discussion. And Jason, I had thought about asking Eric to come on and chat for a while. I need to learn more about Mosby myself, but this is a start, and we'll see where that goes. I only had this idea, I think, on Friday, and considering I worked Friday night at the park and did the book thing Saturday daytime and worked Saturday night at the park, and I didn't have a lot of time. Yes, Niels. I don't know. I don't know if I would say friendship with Grant, but they were cordial. Um, Once again, I need to read more, but having a great conversation. Adam says Wade Hampton despised Fitzhugh. I'm kind of getting that with a lot of people that didn't like Fitzhugh, and maybe that needs to be explored sometime as well. Um, I don't know. We need to explore that as well. I've never done a lot with Mosby in my research and writing. I'm kind of an AP Hill guy, light division, third corps when it comes to that. But working on this Lee project for Savas Beatty for Emerging Civil War has really, to a degree, led me in some areas that I just vaguely know about. When I say vaguely, I might have read an article in Civil War Times 2 decades ago about some of this stuff. But Jason Boshears, good to see you this evening. That relationship between officers and scouts. I remember the story about the Gettysburg story about Harrison, who was Longstreet's scout. And there are a couple of differing accounts about meeting with Lee. In one of those accounts, Harrison is sent to Lee, and Lee refuses to meet with him at first, and then later calls him back. I think, and there's not a lot of books out there on scouts and spies on the Confederate side, but I think there's a lot to those relationships. But I think it's hard because so many times those lines between scouts and spies are blurred. So I'm reading notes. Y'all talk amongst yourselves. Ryan says he just finished reading Gray Ghost and Rebel Raiders. I thought that was the book I picked up off the shelf because I have that book too. But I picked up Gray Ghost of the Confederacy, which is about Missouri. So Elizabeth's over there asking me if I need to switch, and I'm like, I obviously don't know where Gray Ghost and Rebel Raiders is located right now because it was not next to my other two Mosby books. Okay. I don't know where it is. So Jason writes that he was recovering from a wound in Richmond back in November, early December 64. Obviously, he would have got on the train to go to Petersburg to meet with Lee at that point in time. Pretty interesting stuff. Jason says that they probably meet in Richmond in 66 or 67. Probably so. I saw hints of that, but I didn't pursue that any further for this evening. There are, when you talk about, good evening, John Blankenship. When you talk about people like Mosby, it's always Mosby and John Hunt Morgan that rise to the top of conversation. They were not traditional cavalry. They did not operate as mounted infantry. They were kind of this gray, fuzzy area. And of course, John Hunt Morgan commands a whole lot more men and undertakes some serious raids and operations as far up into the Ohio River Valley. Mosby never does that. And I'm really interested. One of the things I saw in the Robert E. Lee Day by Day book was a request to form a Mosby style command in the northern neck of Virginia. And at the time I didn't pursue that, and I don't remember the date. But Lee kind of was not in favor of that because of the way the men could be cut off. But as I was looking through, I think Mosby's Rangers book or one of the Mosby books here, it talks about how some of Mosby's men were operating in the northern neck of Virginia toward the end of the war. So that deserves a little more research as well. Um, Roy Hudson, good to see you this evening. Fitzlee had a disdain for partisan Rangers. A lot of people had a disdain for partisan Rangers. As I said before, they are out there kind of doing their own thing and are not really reporting through regular Confederate military channels. I know Thomas's Legion, not the white troops, not Love's Battalion, but the part that Thomas himself controls operates as partisan Rangers. The Cherokee, the Native Americans with him, and he kind of has that same mentality. You know, he reports to Jefferson Davis and God, and that's it. And so when Robert Vance is in command in the area, when Colonel John B. Palmer is in command of Western North Carolina, that leads to a lot of conflict because they are technically the departmental commanders. And it eventually gets so bad that they kind of split the department into two, with Thomas with the far western North Carolina counties and Palmer with the counties in and around Asheville and where I live. But the disdain for partisan Rangers, you know, there are all these partisan Ranger groups that are started, and then they are funneled off into regular Confederate regiments. The 58th North Carolina troops starts as one of those partisan Ranger outfits or a Legion outfit, Thomas's Legion. Palmer wanted to form his own Legion. And then after the partisan Ranger idea kind of went south, pardon the pun, Palmer's infantry becomes the nucleus for the 58th North Carolina, and his cavalry is transferred to the 5th Battalion, North Carolina Cavalry, which eventually becomes the 6th North Carolina Cavalry. Confusing, a lot of detail. That's right. I remember Pickett and Mosby. I remember reading that just the other day. Went to see Lee when he was in Richmond. I think, and Lee was cordial but distant. I think if Mosby had went by himself, he probably could have had a longer than a 10 or 15-minute conversation with Lee. But Lee had no use for Pickett. That's a whole nother conversation as well. But I do remember reading that the other day about Lee and Pickett and Mosby meeting after the war. Yes. There's so many things we can talk about. So many great little pieces of that history that is interesting to share. I have Mosby's Memoirs over there too, but I didn't flip through those for this evening. Jason, I don't know if it's Lee or Wade Hampton. I like Wade Hampton because of his he's actually a distant cousin, but because of his post-war relationship with John B. Palmer. When Hampton was governor, Palmer was running railroads in South Carolina, and they would get together and go hunting. Hampton was really broke by the war, and Palmer would charter his own train, and they would go places and go hunt and whatever. So interesting thing. Adam, I don't believe I ever had a chance to meet Horace, but so Jason's writing about McNeil's Rangers, and David is writing about John C. Vaughn. If I remember correct, Vaughn actually studied law under Richmond Pearson, one of my side research projects. I go volunteer at a law school, usually once or twice a year when they do living history events. Yes. Um, McNeil's Rangers. There actually is a book called McNeil's Rangers that I read and I actually liked. Not that I don't like a lot of books that I read, but I thought it was a pretty well written book. There may actually be a review of it on the blog, or I might have posted a review on Amazon or someplace. If I read a book and I like it, I try and take and cobble together 4 or 5 sentences and post those Amazon reviews because it really helps. It helps with numbers and helps authors, and it's just nice to get a nice review from time to time. Um, Jason, you're right about the men want to fight in local areas, but it does take men away from the regular Confederate Army. So I think Mosby, with his success, um, was able to show that the idea of the partisan Rangers had validity. Um, but even in the one quote from Lee that I read, Lee's probably getting word back that some of his guys are kind of reckless and whatever. So I think even Lee at times, of course, Lee is a professional soldier. Lee kind of disdained a lot of the guerrilla war type warfare, especially he says that toward the end of the war. Um, but I think he saw validity in what Mosby was doing. He just wished that he would hit bigger targets. And when you only have 100 guys, 150 guys, it's kind of hard to take on some of those bigger targets. But I think about what Mosby did to Sheridan's cavalry in the Valley in '64 when he attacked their wagon train. That I don't know how big of a deal, how bad that might have damaged um, Sheridan's cavalry, but I think it's something to consider. Um, yep, Ryan says Phantoms of the South Fork. Thank you. I think I've even met the author who wrote that. I can't remember that now. I don't know where that one is either. It's over there someplace. Too many books. I didn't really say that. Wade Hampton is the man of the East, as Bedford was the West. I think late in the war, yes, but early in the war, Chip Stewart does a remarkable job. I mean, he is besting the Federals every turn, at least up until mid '63. And I know sometimes we want to say that, his ride around McClellan and his ride at Gettysburg, are just showboating. But when it comes to morale, I think one of the things that have never been explored would be hard to believe there are things that are not explored. At least I've not seen it. How did Stewart's ride during the Gettysburg campaign show up in Northern newspapers? I've had that thought before, but I've never done anything with it. But with today's technology, with all these newspapers online, that's probably something that would only take several days to go through and comb through newspapers from Philadelphia, Boston, and Baltimore, and Harrisburg, and maybe not Harrisburg, Washington, D.C., even as far away as Cincinnati. And just see how that translated into the press. Lee was critical of Stewart in those post-war interviews, that informal interviews that he gave. But it's just something to think about. Jason Boshiers, you are correct. Each story is a human interest story. As Mosby is one, and he's been explored quite a bit over the past few decades. And we'll probably will continue to explore Mosby's story. Other people will continue to explore Mosby's story. Adam says never too many books. I don't know if the floor starts sagging. I don't have that problem because this floor is concrete. But if this starts sagging, then that's bad news. Jason Lloyd Stewart, or no, go back up. Steve French is the author. I don't know if I've met him or not, but it's a small world. So that's my talk for this evening. Y'all have had a lot of fantastic comments there. I am going to sit down and revise this talk, and it will be up on the blog definitely by tomorrow. And I think it's just something to think about. I think unofficially, this may be after I don't know how many years. You know, the blog's birthday is coming up soon. But I think after all of these 13 or 14 years that I've been doing this, this is the first Mosby blog I have ever had. Is that true? He gets mentioned, you know, when I talk about Lewis Powell and Old Capitol Prison. And actually, no, that was a different book. Yep, this looks like the first. There's my review of Phantoms of the South Fork. Yeah, this will be my first Mosby blog. It's interesting. David Pope writes that he never really mastered managing or leading large bodies of troops. I would almost disagree, because after Stuart's death, the cavalry of the Army of Northern Virginia split up into different commands. Wade Hampton takes part of them. Fitz Lee takes part of them. Jackson commands all of them. But that's probably another deep topic that I've probably not read enough about, or I've not read in a long time. Garrett wants to know how many of the partisan Rangers were from the regular Army. I don't know that. You know that there's a new series of books I bought over there that may have that information in them. Garrett will have to look and see what we can come up with. I don't know how many partisan battalions or companies were organized in the Confederacy. We'll have to check that out. That's a great question. Roy writes that he is a descendant of Mosby's men. I actually had an ancestor that served in the 1st Virginia Cavalry. And then I had other ancestors that served under Wheeler. So Wheeler, nobody talks about Wheeler much. And his name just popped up on somebody else's list, and triggered a memory. I do have a biography on Wheeler over there, I think. Maybe 2. No, there might not be more than 1. But that's what's going on here. Like I said, Time Traveling Hardys should be at the event at the Museum of the Waxhaws this upcoming Saturday. Be hanging out in the 1940s. If you live in the southern Piedmont of North Carolina or upstate South Carolina, please come see us. We would love to have you there. Tom Rosser's coming up. 5 Crookshank brothers. Yeah, awesome. Roy Hudson says there were about 800 real Rangers in Mosby's battalion. Cool. I'd know more if I'd read the books on my shelves. Of course, I'm always reading the books on my shelves, but awesome. All right, folks, thank y'all so much for joining me this evening, Hardy on History. Hope it's warmer where you are, because it's 19 degrees outside here now. Great evening to sit by the fire over there, which I probably need to get up and put another log on. Y'all have a fantastic evening. Keep researching, reading, sharing that history, because that's what it's all about. Y'all be safe out there this weekend or this week, and God bless.